Part 1. The mansion was silent except for the faint echo of music drifting from the east wing. Alexander Volkov paused in the grand foyer, one hand still gripping the handle of his suitcase. The chandeliers above him shimmered like frozen stars, casting cold reflections on the marble floor. He had returned from his business trip to Zurich a day earlier than planned. The board meeting had ended ahead of schedule, and for once, the thought of home had pulled him back faster than profit. But home no longer felt like home. Ever since the accident, the mansion had become a museum of memories. Every corridor carried the ghost of his wife's laughter. Every untouched piano key accused him of surviving. And in the quietest room of all, his son's bedroom, there lived a silence so heavy it felt like punishment. Misha hadn't laughed in 11 months. The crash had taken his mother instantly. It had taken Misha's legs slowly, first the paralysis, then the endless surgeries, then the slow death of hope in his eyes. The boy who once raced through gardens and climbed trees now stared through windows as if watching a world he no longer belonged to. Alexander had done everything money could buy. The best surgeons in Europe. Experimental treatments. Private rehabilitation centers. Specialists flown in from Germany and Israel. Therapists rotated through the house like seasonal staff. Nothing worked. Misha spoke only when necessary. Ate only when persuaded. Lived, but did not shine. And Alexander buried himself in work. Because numbers were easier than grief. But now, music, soft at first, almost shy, a melody floating down the hallway like a forbidden memory. Alexander straightened. Music had been forbidden in the East Wing. Too many reminders, too many echoes of the past. He had given strict instructions to the staff: silence, structure, discipline. Misha's schedule was to be followed precisely. No surprises, no emotional risks. Yet the melody continued, not from the sound system installed in the ballroom, that hadn't been touched since his wife's 40th birthday. This was lighter, closer, personal. He set his suitcase down without breaking eye contact with the corridor ahead. Each step he took echoed sharply against the marble floor. The house staff noticed his return and froze like statues along the walls. No one dared speak. The music grew clearer. A waltz, old-fashioned, gentle, the kind his wife used to hum while cooking Sunday breakfasts. His jaw tightened. He reached the double doors of the ballroom. Light spilled from beneath them, warm and golden, unlike the cold white glow used elsewhere in the mansion. He pushed the doors open. And time stopped. In the center of the vast room, beneath the crystal chandelier, Sophia, the cleaning lady, was dancing. Her dark hair had slipped from its tight bun, falling softly over her shoulders. Her simple gray uniform swayed around her worn shoes as she moved in careful circles. And in her hands, Misha. His wheelchair glided across the polished floor as Sophia guided it with slow, graceful steps. One hand rested lightly on the handle. The other held Misha's small fingers as if they were partners at a royal ball. She wasn't performing. She wasn't showing off. She was simply moving. Left, and turn, and smile, young sir, she teased gently. Misha tilted his head back, and laughed. The sound shattered something inside Alexander. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't forced. It was laughter, bright, uncontrolled, alive. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't heard that sound in almost a year. Sophia hummed along with the music playing from her phone, placed discreetly on top of the piano. The melody was slightly distorted from the small speaker, but it filled the room with warmth. You see, she whispered to Misha, dancing isn't about legs, it's about heart. Misha's cheeks were flushed. His eyes sparkled with something Alexander had almost forgotten existed: mischief. They turned again, Sophia stepping back, pulling the wheelchair forward, spinning carefully so the wheels traced smooth arcs across the floor. The chandelier reflected tiny fragments of light across them like falling stars. Then Sophia looked up, and saw him. Her body stiffened mid-step. The music kept playing, but her movements faltered. Alexander stood at the doorway like a storm about to break. Her face drained of color. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, immediately stopping the wheelchair. He said he was tired of exercises. The therapists cancelled today. I thought maybe music would help. Silence. The air in the ballroom grew heavy. Misha's laughter faded into uncertainty. His fingers tightened around the armrests. Alexander stepped forward slowly. His voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. You thought, he repeated. Sophia lowered her gaze. Yes, sir. You were instructed to clean. Not to improvise therapy. I know. Not to enter this room. I know. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not step away from the wheelchair. Misha suddenly lifted his chin. It was my idea, he said firmly. His voice shook, but it was louder than it had been in months. Papa, she didn't force me. I asked. Alexander looked at his son. Really looked. There was color in his face. Life in his posture. Defiance, something he used to admire before the accident stole it. She said, Misha continued, swallowing nervously, that even if my legs don't move, I still can. Alexander's expression did not change. Sophia gathered her courage. I used to study dance, she admitted quietly. Before my mother got sick. I had to leave school to take care of her. When I saw him watching the rain yesterday, I remembered how my teacher once told me that movement can heal things medicine cannot. Alexander's jaw tightened. He had built an empire by trusting data. Facts. Measurable results. Hope was not measurable. And yet, the evidence stood in front of him. His son was smiling. The boy who hadn't left his room willingly in weeks had crossed half the mansion for this. I didn't mean to disrespect your rules, Sophia added softly. If I've overstepped, I'll pack my things. The words hung in the air like a final note. Misha's fingers curled into fists. Alexander walked further into the ballroom. His shoes echoed against the floor with slow, deliberate steps. The staff gathered quietly at the entrance, sensing something extraordinary, or catastrophic, was about to happen. Alexander approached the piano. The music from Sophia's phone still played its gentle waltz. He reached down, unplugged it. The room fell silent. Misha's face paled. Sophia's shoulders sank in quiet resignation. Alexander stood still for a long moment. Then, without a word, he pulled out his own phone. He connected it to the grand sound system, the one untouched for nearly a year. A richer, fuller orchestral melody filled the ballroom. Strings swelled. The acoustics transformed the space into something alive again. Alexander turned toward them. His expression had changed. There was something raw in his eyes, something fragile beneath the iron surface. He stepped closer, closer to his son, closer to the woman who had dared to break his rules. And in a voice that stunned everyone watching, he said quietly, Teach me. Part 2. For a moment, no one moved. The orchestra swelled through the hidden speakers, filling the ballroom with a richness it had not known in nearly a year. The crystal chandelier shimmered above them, scattering light across the polished floor like fragments of a forgotten dream. Sophia blinked, certain she had misheard. Sir, she whispered. Alexander Volkov stepped closer, removing his suit jacket with deliberate calm. He draped it over the back of a nearby chair, rolled up his sleeves, and extended his hand slightly, not as a command, but as a request. I said, he repeated quietly, teach me. The staff standing near the doorway exchanged stunned glances. They had seen their employer close billion-dollar deals without emotion. They had seen him dismiss executives with a single sentence. They had never seen him ask anyone for instruction. Especially not a cleaning lady. Sophia hesitated only a second longer before stepping forward. She gently placed one of Alexander's hands on the handle of Misha's wheelchair. Not too tight, she said softly. Let him feel in control. Alexander adjusted his grip. And your other hand, she continued, guiding his fingers into Misha's small palm, here. Misha looked up at his father, eyes wide. You're going to dance, Papa? Alexander swallowed. Apparently, a faint smile tugged at the corner of Misha's mouth. Sophia stepped back slightly, positioning herself beside them. You don't lead, she explained. You listen. The rhythm tells you when to move. And he tells you where. Alexander nodded once. The music carried a steady 3-count rhythm. 1, 2, 3, Sophia murmured. Misha pushed lightly against the wheels. Alexander followed, awkwardly at first. His steps were stiff, calculated. He moved like a man negotiating invisible contracts with the floor. Sophia circled them slowly, offering quiet corrections. Smaller steps, sir. He adjusted. Look at him, not at the floor. Alexander lifted his gaze. Misha was grinning, not cautiously, not faintly, fully. They turned. The wheelchair glided in a slow arc. Alexander felt the resistance of the wheels, the subtle shifts in balance. He matched them carefully, allowing his son to set the pace. You see, Sophia encouraged gently, he's leading. A strange sensation spread through Alexander's chest, something both painful and liberating. For months he had tried to control every aspect of his son's recovery. He had scheduled every therapy session, approved every medical plan, demanded progress reports. He had fought the situation like it was a hostile takeover. And yet here, when he loosened his grip, something beautiful was happening. They completed their first full circle. The staff at the doorway had fallen completely silent. Misha laughed again, breathless. "We didn't crash." Alexander let out a sound that was almost a chuckle. "That's a good start." Again, Misha insisted. This time the movement came easier. Alexander allowed himself to feel the rhythm rather than calculate it. His steps softened, his shoulders relaxed. He began to anticipate the gentle pressure from the wheelchair, when Misha wanted to turn, when he wanted to spin. Sophia joined them, her movements fluid and graceful. She danced backward in front of Misha, guiding him with her hands in the air like a silent conversation. "Beautiful," she whispered. Halfway through the second song, something unexpected happened. Misha lifted one hand from the wheel and extended it toward his father, as if inviting him into a formal ballroom partnership. Alexander hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. They moved together, father and son, no longer patient and caretaker, no longer broken and helpless. Just partners. When the music ended, the silence that followed felt sacred. Alexander knelt in front of the wheelchair, his breathing uneven. He brushed a strand of hair from Misha's forehead, a gesture he hadn't made since before the accident. "I didn't know you missed this," he said softly. "I didn't know I could still do it," Misha replied. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. He had spent millions trying to fix what was visible. And in one afternoon, Sophia had reached what was invisible. He stood slowly and faced her. "You said you studied dance," he began. "Yes, sir, at the academy in my hometown. I dreamed of performing professionally." She gave a small, embarrassed smile. Life had other plans. Alexander studied her carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. "How long did you train?" 12 years. "And you left because of your mother?" "Yes." He nodded once, processing. The staff assumed he was calculating something financial. They were right, but not in the way they expected. The next morning, contractors arrived at the mansion. By afternoon, architects were measuring the east wing. Within a week, the cold marble of the unused ballroom was replaced with sprung wooden flooring designed specifically for dance and physical therapy. Mirrors lined the walls. Adjustable ballet bars were installed at wheelchair height. Specialized therapists were hired, not just medical professionals, but movement specialists. When the room reopened, it was no longer a forgotten ballroom. It was a studio, and at the small ceremony marking its completion, Alexander invited business partners, local press, and members of the rehabilitation community. They expected a speech about innovation in private healthcare. Instead, Alexander stood beside his son and Sophia and said, "For a year, I tried to buy a miracle." The room fell silent. "I believed strength meant forcing solutions, controlling outcomes, winning against circumstances." He looked down at Misha. "I was wrong." Misha rolled slightly forward, confidence glowing in his eyes. "It turns out," Alexander continued, "strength can look like this." The music began. Misha and Sophia took the center of the floor. Together, they performed a simple, beautiful routine, slow turns, synchronized spins, movements designed to highlight grace rather than limitation. The audience held its breath. And then, applause. Not polite applause. Thunderous. But Alexander wasn't finished. He stepped forward once more. "Today," he announced, "we launch the Volkov Foundation for Adaptive Dance. It will fund programs for children in wheelchairs who want more than survival. They deserve art. They deserve joy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "And," he added, turning to Sophia, "its first director of movement training will be Ms. Sophia Ivanova." Her hand flew to her mouth. Sir, I'm only." "You're exactly who we need," he interrupted gently. Tears filled her eyes. That evening, after the guests had left and the lights dimmed, the three of them remained alone in the studio. Misha looked up at his father. "Are you still going to travel all the time?" Alexander crouched down to his level. "Not as much. Promise." He hesitated, not because he doubted, but because he understood the weight of promises now. "I promise to be here when it matters," he said firmly. Misha nodded, satisfied. Sophia watched quietly from the mirror's reflection. Alexander caught her gaze. "Thank you," he said simply. She shook her head. "He did the hard part." "No," Alexander replied softly. "You reminded him he could." As the final song of the evening played quietly in the background, father and son took their positions once more. Alexander placed his hand on the wheelchair. Misha lifted his chin proudly. And together, beneath the soft glow of studio lights, they moved. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but freely, and in that freedom, Alexander finally understood. He had built an empire from ambition. But he rebuilt his family with one simple decision: to dance.